Welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors. Dr. Allen chats with successful investors exploring their journey from setback to triumph. Through this window, we glimpse the truths that inspire our guests to invest abundantly and flourish in all areas of life. And now your host, Dr. Allen.
Hello and welcome to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, where we delve deep into the lives of our successful guests to learn the secrets of thriving to flourish abundantly in all areas of life. I'm your host, Dr. Allen. My guest today is the founder of the Urban Pacific group of companies that focuses exclusively on urban infill and affordable housing communities throughout California and the Western U.S. Over the last 18 years, the company has developed nearly 1,700 units. Presently, Urban Pacific has created a new housing innovation called Urban Townhomes, which provides middle-income, multi-generational housing to urban families, while producing market-superior yields on investment equity. Historically, Urban Pacific's UTHs have delivered 29% IRR yields on equity. Welcome my guest today, Scott Choppin.
Great, Alan. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Glad you could be with us, Scott. I like to get to know my guests by getting to know them as they were as children. So if you can think back, Scott, to a time in your life, as you look back on it, you look on that as a transformative experience that has contributed to the adult that you are today.
Absolutely. I love these questions, by the way. These are, we're going to get to talk about this stuff probably as much as we would like to. So I had an interesting background. I mean, to me, it's interesting, but I think in relative terms to, how it formed my personality and who I was as an entrepreneur. So for the first, say, 12 years of my life, I grew up basically with my mom, Kathleen, and, really I love my mom, but, we were poor. And at 12, just given, sort of the environment and sort of a need to, expand my horizons, I moved to Long Beach. I was born in Long Beach. We moved away, and then I came back to Long Beach to live with my dad, Carrie, at about 12, and I've been really in Long Beach ever since. So I could say born and raised here ultimately. And so the two really are what formed me. So growing up, with my mom, we didn't have a lot of money. We lived in a rural environment. And so I think that built, a lot of independence in me. Basically being out in the, in the rural locations that we were, you weren't particularly, concerned with, physical safety other than, falling down the sides of hills and, doing silly things that kids do. And it had me be oriented around figuring out how to do things for myself. Not only figuring out how to do things for myself, but to actually do them, right? So maybe you could think of it as a philosophy of self-responsibility, right? I knew ultimately that if I was going to get things done, it was going to be ultimately up to me to do it. When I moved with my dad, he basically, my dad, Carrie, and my uncle, Mike, were real estate developers based in Long Beach. And as you and I spoke about earlier, my family on my dad's side has been in Long Beach since the late 40s. So, pretty deep roots in relative terms, at least in California for our family being in Long Beach. And I still live here and raising my kids, fourth generation here. I love it. And that gave me access to people who were entrepreneurs, who were in the real estate development business. Both my uncle Mike and my dad Carrie were in the business. And so I got to basically, in my formative years, like really when you start to pay attention to those kind of things in your teenage years, and they become more meaningful. Like I had built this background of, what real estate development was. I was on job sites for apartment buildings that my dad built at 16, before I was, going off to high school, picking up trash, moving equipment. So, work ethic and basically getting hands dirty was never an issue. And so I think the combination of those two really, I think this is a common story of an entrepreneur when, you're not given everything that you would desire when you're young. It gives you a certain hungriness to achieve, right? And so I think that was in my, particularly in my early years in my childhood, very, very formative experiences, and happy childhood, right? And no negatives, just didn't have everything that we wanted, and sort of with this independence that comes from a single parent household and living in a rural location, that gave me that capability to just figure it out and get it done.
You made the transition from your mom's place at 12 years old to your dad's place. It sounds like it was a choice that you made. What did you base your decision upon?
I'll change it. It wasn't. It just happened to be a good time. So between my mom and my dad, that decision was made. So for me, at least, it was. I didn't invoke the change. I didn't resist it. And in fact, quite honestly, when I arrived in Long Beach, it was a real game changer for me, Alan. I recognized at 12 and 13 years old that I was a city boy, right? To put a colloquial term on it, and I loved the energy of it. I can remember it at night. When I first moved in with my dad, you had great radio stations. I remember listening to an oldies station on a stereo, right? Like those things with tubes, in the old days. And the window was open in my room in the apartment we lived in Long Beach, and just listening to the city noise in the background and having this music playing. That was a real, experience for me. And it had a hugely, it was a great feeling. Like I felt energized. So although I didn't necessarily know about that, meaning I couldn't have anticipated that when I did move, when I finally arrived, that was noteworthy for me. Now, I was 12 and 13, right? Awkward years, and moving to a new school. I transferred schools when I was, the tail end of 6th grade. So, you're starting from scratch in the way of forming friend groups and all that worked out at the end of the day. And certainly there's a lot more trouble you can get into in the city. And I certainly had my share of that as well. But I think it was just a decision amongst my parents that it might be good for me as a teenage boy to be around my dad. I would certainly say that was that turned out to be a correct way to look at it. So for sure it was a positive experience ultimately moving to the city. Moving back, maybe is the way I'd say it.
Well, all of us come to major forks in the road. As you look back over your life, what was a major turning point in your life?
Yeah, great question. So when I graduated from high school, I didn't necessarily have a specific ambition or objective. I think I graduated when I was 17 from Wilson High School in Long Beach. And I didn't really have a specific plan. Looking back on it now, it seemed silly that I wouldn't, but I was, looking for a place to go and something to do. I didn't necessarily have that direction from, either of my parents, and I love both of them dearly. This just happened to be sort of how it was. So I actually spent a couple of years working in the construction trades. I was basically, for about 6 months, 8 months, I was a, busboy at a restaurant and, working for wages and tips. And then I got a job working as an electrician, actually on an apartment building during the mid 80s or sort of late 80s, I suppose, working on, numerous apartment buildings that were being built, prior to that recession. And so what came out of that time period was there were really a couple of events I'll describe. So I remember working on a job site. I was an electrician, which, in that trade in the construction industry, that's actually, one you have to have, relative, good intelligence capability to, read plans, do calculations. I mean, we didn't do engineering, but, there was, I think in comparison to some trades, there was that plus doing electrical work is cleaner than being a plumber, as an example, or a ditch digger. And so I was at 18, 19 years old, making more money than any of my friends. And I wasn't even making that much money in relative terms as I look back on it. But I could tell that I wasn't meant for this. Like I always had the feeling inside of me that I was destined for something bigger than that. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that was just as I watched my dad and my uncle and the success that they had, like this wasn't what I was doing at the time satisfactory relative to the, standards that were being set around me. Now I didn't think of it that way at the time, right? That's is my, 50-year-old self, looking backwards, but there was a dissatisfaction, visceral, right? And I remember specifically working on a job site, middle of the day. I don't even remember. I was in Long Beach somewhere, sometime in the late 80s. And I remember the developer pulled up in his car in the front of the job site. Now, because I had this background in development, I knew who this guy was, not like him specifically, but like, he was the developer, he was the business guy. He was the guy who put this together and made it happen. And I'll never forget, wearing a suit, pointing at stuff, making stuff happen, nice car. And I remember thinking, I want to be that guy. I don't want to be working construction when I'm 40 years old or 45. And the people that I was around were great people, Alan, salt of the earth. And it really taught me how to understand people who are in that environment, right? I mean, we still, as a developer, deal with people in the construction industry, almost daily. But it dawned on me, I go, oh, this is what I want to be. And because I had that background of what a real estate developer was, like I could, intuitively know that was a direction I wanted to head. And so I had that really formative experience, and, combined with a couple other things, which I'll just mention quickly. I read one of those real estate books. I can't even remember the guy who wrote it, but it was, how to make $1 million in real estate working on the weekends.
Overnight.
Pretty famous. Yeah. Famous book from, I think, the 50s or 60s.
Right.
And although I had this background in development from, being around projects, that book opened my eyes to deal making, to being an entrepreneur. Like you could find a property, you could do something to it to add value. You could buy low and sell high. You could fix it up and increase the rents. I mean, really that was value add before it was called value add, right? It was just, real estate investing. And that really brought forth for me, I go, oh, this is what, my dad and my uncle, this is what they do. I mean, I knew they built buildings and I knew they bought land and, owned apartments. But I, hadn't necessarily understood, the more nuanced details of deal making and producing profits, right? That was like, I go, hey, you can make money. And I think part of the dissatisfaction in working in construction is you see guys who are 45, their backs are bad, their knees are bad, they're making, double what I was making at the time as a low man on the totem pole. But that wasn't really that much, right? As I started to learn. And then the last one really was at the tail end of that period of working construction, a family friend, a dear friend of mine, the guy named John Rothrock. It was a counselor at Huntington Beach High School. He was the surf coach at Huntington Beach High School for forever and ever. He's since passed away. He sat me down one day, and as he was sort of this counselor personality that he was, and just his own personality, sort of a just, great salt of the earth, no bullshit kind of guy. He sat me down, face to face, and he said, so Scott, what do you want to do? Like he just, asked me that question, which, at 18 or 19 years old, nobody really necessarily asks you that. I mean, I ask my kids that, but that's because that's who I am. And I said, I thought about it. And because it was John, I took the question seriously. Like when he was this way with you, you didn't, it wasn't serious. I mean, it was serious, but it wasn't like, the end of the world. Like you just knew that this is the conversation you had with somebody like John or with John. And I said, I want to work for myself. He goes, okay. So, oh no, sorry. I'm getting it out of order here. So we sat down, he said, so what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be in business. He goes, okay. He goes, you want to be a corporate guy? You want to work for yourself? And I said, I want to work for myself. I want to run my own company. I want to work for myself. And I didn't know to call it an entrepreneur at the time. And he looks at me and he goes, I'll never forget this. He looks at me dead in the eye and he goes, then you need to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. This is John, right? He graduated from there. And a high school counselor, mind you. So this was, his sort of natural state. And I go, to me at that point in time, I had been toying with college. I was sort of half-assing junior college, Alan, not taking it real seriously. And that was I turned the corner at that point in time. And it was finally, for me, became clear. And I think I was probably late in my, 18th year, that the background in real estate development, this book that I had read about, making deals and being an entrepreneur, and then this advice I got from, a dear family friend sort of finally coalesced for me to say, okay, this is what I want to do. And this is what I need to do. Here's, at least the early steps of becoming an entrepreneur. Now, for me, that was to go to college and get a business degree. Right. And, I tell people today, you don't have to go to college to be an entrepreneur. I know many, many people who never touch college and are very amazing business people. For me, that was the place to be because I, probably had more maturing to do as a person. This was a place that I could go get a degree to get into the professional development industry. I wasn't necessarily, I knew ultimately I was going to work for myself, Alan, but I needed in the meantime to get educated and to go work for other people who are highly expert in the business, professionally, and that this was the course I needed to take. And I, basically figured that at 18 years old through these events.
Well, that's pretty amazing for an 18, 19-year-old.
Appreciate
to
that.
figure out what their purpose is in life. And of
I
course, I can tell you didn't have it all put together, but you had enough of it put together that you at least could lay out a roadmap, and that roadmap led to college.
Right.
And then from college, you had the maturity and a lot of education and a lot of information to actually start putting it all together. I expect, though, that it didn't all just automatically fall in place just because you had a degree in business. I'm sure there were many challenges and bumps in the road to get to where you are today. We're running out of time here, but just briefly tell us how you got from college to actually establishing your business.
Great question. Thank you for that. So you're right. There was, a lot of friction on the way, and I think that's true for everybody. So that's nothing necessarily unique to myself. Graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a finance degree in the business department. And through my networks of associates and colleagues professionally, through my dad in the real estate development business, he had met and knew a guy named Mike Costa. And Mike Costa had, about 6 months before I graduated from Cal Poly, moved from a company that it was at the time to form a subsidiary, real estate development, a subsidiary to a company that was called Kaufman and Broad. His subsidiary was Kaufman and Broad Multi-Housing Group. People now know it today as KB Home, one of the big, national home building companies. And Mike had formed this division to finance, syndicate, and develop apartment communities really throughout the nation ultimately. And so 6 months before I graduated, I through my dad's networks, met Mike, talked to him on the phone. It was too early for us to connect and for there to be a role for me to arrive. I mean, he literally just formed it. So I took another job working for a commercial general contracting company. And for about a year to a year and a half, every couple months, I would go down to the payphone in the high-rise building I worked in for this other company in downtown LA, and I would call Mike. Of course, I couldn't call from the office. That wouldn't be appropriate. Just to check in, say, hey, Mike, I'm still here. I'm still, interested in this position. I'd love to come to work when you're ready for me. And then probably, after about a year, maybe give or take, the other company, he finally was the right time. And that was really a key move for me because it got me directly into a professional real estate development company that focused on apartment development, right? That was ultimately, as I refined my aspirations and objectives and ambitions for my career, I knew I wanted to be a real estate developer and I was going to be in the housing marketplace. And then, as I looked at it, I wasn't necessarily going to go into home building. At least that didn't feel right. And I did interview with other companies for that first job. Some were home building companies, and I could just tell that wasn't a space for me necessarily. And so I got the job with Mike, and that was key because it was in that business, but also Mike philosophically, and I still do business with Mike now, as much time has gone by. He was the type of real estate developer or manager of this division that when you went to work for him, you weren't siloed as a project manager. That was my initial role. You basically, cradle to grave, you found the deal, you did the entitlements, you financed it, with his help and their resources, of course, built the deal, got it leased up, and then, got it to the asset management folks. And so that really gave me the broad and deep education of really how to be a deal maker. I mean, we weren't independent. We were employees of that corporation, but philosophically, Mike managed us and looked for us to manage projects in that way that developers and entrepreneurs ultimately do. And so that was I was there for, about 4 years, and just a super key, position. So where that came from, to answer your question, is, that came from networks, Alan, right? Like people that we know, or, people that we know that know people, that can refer us to, and I don't mean networking in sort of I think, common sense. I mean, really having a network of people that are based on trust and experience and competence between each other, that they can then make valuable referrals and say, hey, me, so my son Scott's, he's a good kid, he might be worth a shot. And Mike having trust in my dad in particular, that this was a, valid assessment, that I wasn't, going to screw things up. So that really, ultimately, if I look back on it, that network building, that increase and expansion of people that we work with, that we trust and they trust us, has been key, and it keeps being more and more valuable as I get on in my career. Really, in many ways, besides the knowledge you have of your industry, be it real estate development or investment, which that needs to be learned also, right? That falls to me under that, the 10,000 hour, the Malcolm Gladwell, sort of rule of thumb, that it's our networks and the specific work we do to build those networks powerfully with the right people that are achievers, that are, getting things done, that are after, their own, objectives, and want to work with people who are after their objectives, and to trade help and be powerful offers of help to each other. That has been absolutely the most key thing in my entire career.
Fascinating story, and inspirational to many people. I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people think I don't really have an inspirational story, but I don't think there's really any of us who don't have something to inspire others.
Agreed.
In some way, shape, or form. I like about your life that it has been it has been one of intention, but it has been one of calmness and clarity, which is it's not always something I see in other individuals. There's often a lot of hyper energy, a lot of people, as particularly entrepreneurs, who think it has to happen today.
Yeah,
but you were
don't get me wrong, Alan. There has been plenty of that. I'm probably hiding it well, but no, I'm with you. I agree on the idea of intention. That's actually a great way to describe it, because intentions are objectives and commitments that we claim for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back to that idea of self-responsibility. Until you do that, you can't move forward. Right. And I think, as I observe people in my career, even my own kids, until those intentions, maybe call them ambitions or objectives, I mean, they go by different names, But until you have that target and that location to go to, you can't have a plan or work to go that place. You're in drift, and that's a dangerous place to be in my mind.
Yeah, it is. And I think another thing that's remarkable about it in your life is that you were able to come to that at a really early age. And of course, you had some good mentors, your dad, your uncle, the counselor in particular. And I suppose if you really dug deep into it and thought about it, you probably had many other support systems
Agreed.
as well there.
Yeah. I think at one key, I was always a keen observer of people, of things that were happening. I may not have understood them, but I was, I always felt like I was, watchful. In fact, a guy I worked for, when I worked for Mike Cossey, he is, in a very nice way, called me a sponge. Like I just, all the knowledge I could get was just like, I was after, like, just, sucking it up in a positive way. But it's true. And that just became a natural thing. But I think it's turned out to be well, because you have to have the objectives, you have to have the intention, and you need to be able to learn, right? Observation is just a form of learning. So I agree with you. I'm sure there's mentors that I probably should go back and think about that I didn't observe necessarily what value was being purveyed to me, and thank those people. So I love that. Thank you for that.
We're coming to the end of our program here. I have one last question that I ask most all of my guests. Before I get to that, tell the viewers and listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Appreciate that. So I would encourage folks to go to our website, which is www.urbanpacific.com. Take a look at our investor education section. There's the tons and tons of articles and videos and podcasts and a lot of data about, the multifamily development investment business. On that website, there's a contact page. My cell phone and my email are on there. People are welcome to text me. Email's best. And then I certainly would encourage people to go check us out on YouTube under Urban Pacific Group, or I'm on LinkedIn, LinkedIn/Scott Choppin. And people are welcome to reach out to me in any of those ways.
Very good. Well, my last question is, when you come to the end of this life's journey, how do you want your epitaph to read?
Yeah, I love this question. So I'm Alan, so my existential meaning really revolves around my family. So I'm married to my wife, Becky, for, let's see, I think we're 23 years now that we're married. We have 3 kids. And so my family is really the most important thing that I work for. And so I would want on my epitaph that I basically took great care of my family, that I launched my kids, into being successful adults, and that I basically did something, positive to the world. And particularly, this is why I'm encouraged to work on this workforce housing model, the UTH models, because it does, it's not the lead component of it that is a social, benefit story, but it does have a social benefit, which is housing working families that are really sort of ignored in the marketplace. And maybe ignored's harsh, but the marketplace is not serving them the way that is, most appropriate for them to live a great life, right? So, in essence, I get to help other people live great lives while, helping my family live a great life. So something inside there would be on the epitaph.
Well, wonderful. I hope you have a long and prosperous life. It's a long time until you have that epitaph.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for being on the program. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to Creekside Chats with successful multifamily real estate investors, brought to you by Steed Talker Capital. Steed Talker Capital works with both new and established investors nationwide, creating opportunities to flourish in all areas of life. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steed Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steed Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures great and small flourish abundantly. For resources to enhance your well-being through multifamily real estate investment, connect with us online at capital.steedtalker.com.